Annemarie Chase is a YouTuber with over 280,000 subscribers, and she's built a platform for herself based on her mindfulness, spirituality, and balance in life. And in this conversation, we spoke about her ideas, why she's attracted to thinkers like Naval Ravikant and Tim Ferriss, and why she is starting a podcast called The Unemployed Millennial. I enjoyed this conversation tremendously. Annemarie's incredibly wise, incredibly thoughtful, and I really believe you'll enjoy this conversation. This conversation is brought to you by My First Million. My First Million is one of my favorite podcasts because you get to know the behind the scenes of what's happening in business and technology, and you'll learn about the future and where we're headed in a fun and interesting way. If you enjoyed this podcast, you might also enjoy My First Million. Check it out wherever you listen. Click the link below. Well, Annemarie, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me, Danny Miranda. I'm so
First and
excited
last
to be here.
name?
Yeah. You have a great name.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You do too.
Thank you.
Your bio says more ideas, less things. Mm-hmm. Why?
I think that really comes from the YouTube space. So I do YouTube, and I have this big thing. I think that YouTube for the girlies, like I started 10 years ago. And at the time, girls were only talking about like makeup and fashion. And it's like a lot of selling people a product. And maybe it's like from growing up in Alaska, or just like, I think it's very wasteful. Like there's like a very big consumerist cycle on YouTube where it's just like pushing you to buy things and buy like junk that you won't use. Like back in the day, there were like these huge makeup room tours filled with makeup, just like, and I'm like, I have the same palette that I've used for like the last 5 years. There's no way that you're using this much makeup. And then what do? Like you just kind of like hold on to it or throw it away, and it's just very wasteful. And I've always liked ideas like kind of more, I guess. I'm not very good at fashion or clothes, so it's just kind of my domain, I feel. So I kind of emphasize that, I think.
What do you think attracted you to ideas in the first place?
That is a great question. I don't know. I really don't know. I think it's just, I like connecting with people and having conversations. And if you have a wide breadth of things that you know, you can kind of talk to anyone or have interesting conversations with anyone. I feel like you're the same way. How would you answer that question?
Well, I think things represent the surface level.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, like these clothes,
Yes.
or it's like very much like when someone compliments something that we have, it's like you're complimenting a car, but that's not you. It's a reflection of something inside of you, but there's a deeper level to why you wanted that car, right? Someone could say nice car, and then you could be like, thanks. And then someone else could ask, why did you want that car in particular? That idea in your head will have a deeper meaning than just the car itself.
Wow, I love that. I did a video with my dad, and he said something like, we're spiritual beings in like a physical world. And I feel like I'm like spiritual, or I don't really know what that means, and I don't really know how to define it. But I've always focused a lot on like the inner world versus like the outer world. And I don't know, something you said about that really resonates. I think that's like very fascinating.
You focus a lot on your parents in your content, and I've really like enjoyed learning about you through your parents and through you interviewing your parents. You had a video with them. I listened to both episodes you did with your parents. It was like beautiful to hear how their lives have shaped you in a way. And it was cool to learn about you learning about different things from your parents' life. Like, oh, I should have known this, or that's what podcasts do. You learn about things that you don't expect. But why do you focus so strongly on your parents in your content?
I think I focus a lot on people. I think about that a lot. I'm just like, I feel like I am the way I am because of I think everyone's the way they are because of the environment that they grew up in. That's why I think if you have like such polarizing opinions, it's just that you don't have that connecting point. So I think, like my dad was in the army and the military, and that I think leads to like a very interesting life. Like I grew up on base in Washington, and my mom like immigrated from Korea. And growing up more, I think I realized that a lot of the things that people think are like interesting about me, or they're like, oh, you like love different foods. You're very open to different cultures. I'm just like, that's literally just because I was raised that way. So I'm kind of fascinated too by that. And like a lot of the things, like some Korean immigrants, when they first came here, they were very ashamed of their culture and they wanted to hide it. And my mom has never been like that. And so I'm just like very grateful for her for exposing me to culture and her culture. And like, I feel like I'm culturally, like I love Korean food. Like I kind of like the values that, you know, maybe like Asian cultures, East Asian people like have. They're very like community driven, like loving by food. I don't know. These are maybe not the best examples, but I think that's what I'm fascinated by. It's not necessarily like, I also love my parents. I think they're like, I love hanging out with them. There's some like, I'm grateful that I love spending time with them, but I think I'm just more fascinated also that like it always takes a village. Like you're never just shaped by yourself. And I think I'm kind of interested in exploring that idea.
I think there's also a part of you that has such a strong interest in people and understanding and trying to understand different people. Like I loved when you interviewed Sneako and because that was...
A lot of people do not like that.
Well, that's why, right? Because it's a crossover that you just wouldn't expect. Here you are in one video going to Washington, maybe like one of the most liberal states.
Yeah.
And then in another video, you're talking to somebody who would probably never live in Washington.
Yeah.
And from that, you get a deeper understanding of humans in general. So like what inspired you to interview Sneako and what inspired you to like take a look at him in that way?
So what inspired me to interview him is I base all of my interactions with people. I don't let the internet dictate how I feel about people. And Sneako has always been like very kind. Like he's been a good person to me. And he's also pushed me myself like for my own content and for like my furthering of my thoughts and my ideas and trying to be more bold, because I think a big thing that I'm overcoming in this past year of just like pushing out so much more content is I used to overthink everything and just be like, oh, this is going to offend. Like, and I have gotten that feedback for Sneako. It's like, I can't believe that you would platform Sneako. And to be honest, like I don't watch like a lot of his content. He's actually like he got banned off of like that title. I copied it from this guy named Ryan Eng. It was Sneako, like the Kanye of YouTube. And it's really funny because that actually like came to be true. But I don't know. I think he's a good person. I honestly do. And so he's challenged me to even that video was a huge challenge for me. And it made me think a lot. And I wanted to portray him in a way that I genuinely feel about him. Because when I hang out with him, he's always hanging out with different types of people, which I think is really important. I think that bringing different people from everywhere, like if you're able to do that, that's kind of a superpower. And I think the people who are so offended by him are kind of like in their own little bubbles, where he explores like so many different bubbles. And I think he's a 20-something-year-old boy. I think just in this day and age, growing up on the internet, you're gonna make some mistakes. And I can't say that I like watch all of his content or agree with everything he says, but I don't think he's a bad person. And I think he's trying to do a lot to kind of just push the boundaries of what he even thinks that he can do or say. And he's figuring out himself. So that's kind of why I made the video. That I had a lot of anxiety posting that.
Take me through that.
Yeah, well, I get a lot of anxiety posting like any video.
Why?
I have no idea. I think it's a fear of being seen, maybe. I'm trying to explore that more as well. And I'm actually trying to like do different methods. Like even for my podcast, I'm like, if I have so much, like I love posting and putting my ideas out there, but I'm like, I don't want that many people to see them.
Why?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think it is interesting being around so many YouTubers in this past year because that's all they want to do is they want to be seen. They want people to come up to them, where I'm really just like, I want to have these conversations, have these ideas. I don't want to be approached like at the dinner table by like, I love meeting people. Every time I meet someone, I actually genuinely feel like we have like a deep, meaningful interaction, just maybe based on like the videos that I put out. But I think I'm just hyper aware. So I can tell I can tell when someone recognizes me. Like I'm very aware of my surroundings. I think I'm like a highly sensitive person, whatever. Even if I'm with a friend, like a YouTuber, I'm like, this person's going to come up to you. Or like, this person knows who you are. And they're like, what? So I don't know. There's like definitely some anxiety there. I think maybe I need to work through, but I think it's a fear of being seen for the most part and being judged.
What does it feel like then when you are judged in the comment section? Does that make you feel, okay, I can take it? Or does that make you feel scared? I'm never going to post again? Or does that make you feel excited? Like how does you being judged make you feel?
That's a great question, because the times where I feel like I have gotten that backlash, I usually don't agree with it. And so I'm just like, okay, this is not how I see things. So I don't think it's that important. Like I remember the first time I got some backlash, I literally like went on like a 10-mile like rollerblade. Like it's like an anxiety thing to like, it's a physical feeling. And I remember I think I was just reading The Power of Now, and I'm really bad at kind of summarizing what is in a book, but it just kind of absorbs in me. Into
your being.
Yeah.
100%.
And that was kind of a pivotal book for me in that, you know, the internet is kind of a facade. And if you just if you're truly living in the moment, like if we're just sitting here having this conversation, then it doesn't even really exist unless you let it. Because it's not physical. It's not like someone yelling at me. And I don't think they would do that. Actually, Sneako said that. He was trying to kind of give me a push to just be like, just post like whatever you want to. Like I've never had and I'm surprised that he hasn't, but like he's never had a hater come up to him in person. You know, it's always just on the internet.
Yeah. Well, you said perception trumps reality, especially online.
Yes.
And I feel like that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yes. I think that's a good point to go to. I read one PR book and it had that, like, that's the only takeaway that I had. And I love that. And actually I had a meetup recently and a lot of people came up to me and they're like, I loved this point. And I was like, that's something I've been thinking of so much lately, because even if you think of the hate, or even if you think of praise, it's like you could be praising someone for the perception that they put out on the internet. And if you were to meet them in person, it might not be the same feeling or interaction. And I kind of believe that like you don't truly really know anyone unless you are able to like sit right in front of them and have like a conversation and read their kind of energy and how they treat you.
Yeah.
So I think perception completely trumps reality on the internet, but it's inevitable. So that's kind of a really interesting thing. But I also think, so I was a part of a content house, and it's fascinating because you have a different perception from each of the characters and how they portray you. And I think that was even something that was a huge learning for me, because it's like, oh, for some reason I always just assume like, oh, this is going to come off really bad, or this is not going to be well received. But then if you're in other people's content, you don't like have the control over that. And sometimes like you're surprised at the perception. You're like, oh, people can see me for like who I think I am.
What was that experience like? Being on your mom's house? Like it was in one sense a show, like a television show.
Yeah.
In another sense, it was real life, your real
Yeah.
life. Did it feel like the Truman Show? I don't know if you're familiar with that movie.
People have referenced that like 3 times in the last week. I have not seen it, so I don't.
You're going to watch the Truman Show if you do decide to, and you're going to say, wow, I was living in this reality.
Okay,
yeah,
I have to watch
it's
it
pretty
now.
scary. But I'm curious from your perspective, like, how did it feel to live with 3 other YouTubers? And then why did you leave before everyone else?
Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to the perception trumps reality thing. I think I try to live most in reality or whatever. And that doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. Like everyone has their own reality. But I'm like, I feel comfortable in mine. And I don't want to have this perception that doesn't match reality. Because then I feel like it's a lie. And I'm so bad at lying. Like my face will get red. It's just not something I can do. Like, so I try to live as authentically as possible. And I just felt that there are barriers in that experience. But that's not to say that it was a negative experience. Like, I think that is like a changing point in my life. Like, I learned so much, and just being around different creators and seeing how they do things. And yeah, it was like that. You can't like buy that kind of learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I remember listening to one podcast, and you were saying, you guys have shown me that it's possible to make it on YouTube.
Yeah.
And you'd probably been doing YouTube at that point for 8 years.
Yep.
Which is incredible. Like that they gave you that that feeling of, oh wow, it's possible.
Yeah. They did.
What spurred that?
I think it's a little, I just learned that you're 27, so you're closer to my age. Mm-hmm. And I think, growing up, you had like these very traditional pathways. And I think honestly, just like 22-year-olds of today, they grow up just knowing that the world is their oyster with the internet.
Yeah.
The world is their oyster. Yeah.
That works.
With the internet. They're able to see it as like an additional landscape. Whereas when I was graduating, like I remember the dean coming around, like, and I avoided him like at every table. He was like, where are you guys working? And he was like so proud because everyone said these like consulting jobs like KPMG, Deloitte, like Deutsche Bank. And then I was like, I'm going to try to do something like not traditional. So I think maybe that, but also I kind of just saw just like the fearlessness of them posting online. Like they didn't have all these blockages that they were getting in their own way about. And I was like, okay, if I can overcome these types of blockages that I have put on myself, then I think I can actually do this and like make it work.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you posted every week consistently freshman year of college. Yeah. Every single week you had a post out on Monday, I believe.
How did you know that?
We do our research here. And so you clearly didn't have a blockage at that point, or did you? And were you overcoming it?
That's a great question. I think maybe I feel like that was very similar to my first like 5 or 4 months at your mom's house. It's just like you kind of get into this routine, this like system. But then you end up with like a platform or people like watching your videos. And I think it's kind of necessary to take a step back and be like, is what I'm posting in alignment with what I'm trying to do? Maybe. That's a great question. I don't know. Like, and I think also it's like I was just trying to vlog my real life experience in college because that wasn't really a big thing at the time. Where now I'm like, okay, I've had these real life experiences, and I think people actually come to me for their like, we want your learnings. Like now I'm like the older sister, like because I was also 4 years older than everyone at your mom's house.
Really?
Yeah.
How did that impact?
I think it was kind of nice, honestly, because I think I've always just kind of been like more mature for my age. But if you're talking to a peer and, you're trying to give them advice, not to say like I'm, but they're not going to listen to it as much. Where I feel like at your mom's house, my ideas came to reality, like more so, and with that group than probably anywhere else, especially with building on the internet. That's very different. That takes a very specific skill set. And yeah, like it takes time. So I think it was kind of nice because I think younger people automatically give me credibility because they're like, 26 is so old. I'm like, okay, sure. So it was nice. I liked that, honestly.
Yeah. It's interesting when you have like an old soul, how like you sometimes don't get to present it unless you're really seen in that moment.
Yeah.
Unless that person is like willing to see it. And because if you're 17 years old and you feel in your heart like you're 47 or like feel like you're doing things in a different way, it's not often where people will actually take you seriously.
Exactly. And I think even I really like the age that I'm at. I'll be 27 next month. But I think because I'm always like with like younger people, because they are just like internet native, they're like, oh, we know what this can do. They do like now see me as like, oh, like you're so smart. I guess it's because you're so old. But I'm like, no, I've always had these thoughts. Like, yeah, I've always been a genius. Just kidding. No, I've always had these thoughts, but it's just like, I get it is the thing. It's like, are people willing to listen, I guess.
What do people come to you for advice specifically these days?
I guess like maybe balance, or like one of my younger friends like asked for like relationship advice. I think that's like a thing that young people these days like don't do a lot, is relationships. So I feel like I have a lot of experience there where I'm just like, I'm actually like, that's not something I'm like trying to build on, I guess. So yeah, either like relationship stuff, balance, or like, I guess mindfulness.
Yeah. I mean, one comment from your YouTube channel struck me where someone said, honestly, your channel to me is like a breath of fresh air. You inspire me to be well mentally, physically, and spiritually. It's a beautiful thing to be known for.
Yeah, that is a very beautiful comment.
Why do you think someone left that comment?
I think it's interesting because on the internet, sometimes people grab onto things that I really value, but if you're living in your own head, you're not sure like what ideas or thoughts are unique to you or what people think are interesting. But I do focus like on all those things a lot. That's really important in my life, just because I feel like there's no other way to live my life. Like growing up, I was very anxious. It has taken me like pretty much up until this point in time. It's taken me like 10 years to develop the tools for either first like the awareness, the recognition of like, oh, I have anxiety. Like in high school, I literally had like, I would bite my cuticles to the point that they looked like warts because it's just like I didn't have another outlet. So it's like I've learned like journaling, yoga, like exercise, like those healthy outlets over like 10 years. So I think maybe that's why people are like, oh, Annemarie does all these things for her like wellness or like well-being. But for me, it's just like there's no other option or else I would not be able to do anything.
Yeah. Well, it's funny also that your bio says like Alaska and New York City.
Yeah.
Almost feels like two completely different spectrums of reality.
Yeah.
And like I think about Alaska, and correct me if I'm wrong, I've never been to Alaska, but Alaska to me strikes me as like in balance with nature, at one with the world as it was in the past, and New York's like the ultimate consumerist world. And that's not like to say that the consumerist is bad or anything like that, but it just strikes me as like two polar extremes. How do you think about that balance and taking the Alaska to New York City and taking the good parts of New York City to Alaska?
I love that question because I always tell people whenever I can. I think Alaska and New York are the perfect balance. Like if you could do both, that is the perfect world in my book, because like I'm staying at Elliot Choy's place and I got there like at night and then like I'm sleeping on his couch and he's like, you could look at this bridge. I don't know which bridge it is. It was like midnight and he was like, sometimes I just like sit in here and I'm like, I just see all these cars go by on this bridge and I'm just so glad that I'm home in my space. There's constantly things happening here. That's why when I come back to New York, I'm like, it feels kind of like a vacation. But also it's like I can meet so many people here, like get so many things accomplished. But then when I'm back in Alaska, I can take the time to think, because I think you need alone time. I think you need to like take the time to listen to your inner voice. I heard you on a recent podcast, you said like sometimes you say in your podcast, like stop listening to this podcast and listen to yourself.
Yeah.
I am a huge proponent of that. Just again, because it's like there's no other way for me. I like need alone time. And so yeah, when I go back to Alaska, it's like it can be hard to live there, but I think it is like the perfect balance. You're very in tune with nature. Like I feel extremely in tune. Like even like birds come up to me and like I'm not kidding. Like I have really interesting interactions with like wildlife. I think people are more in tune with nature. I feel like all of my Alaska friends, there's this perception that Gen Z really cares about the planet, but from my experience, like they're pretty wasteful. Like, I don't know, but in Alaska, all my friends they try to like minimize their weight. They're actually actively doing it and they don't talk about it that much, but it's just like an observation that I have. I think people are more in tune with like even where their food comes from. Like you do so many mindless things because you're a part of society and you don't see like the behind the scenes. But I feel like there it's very like kind of stripped down and raw, and people are real people. They don't have this like facade that they can build up. And there's just really something magical about both places, I think.
What do you think is the biggest thing that you've learned from being in Alaska that you're like, I wish more people would take this trait to New York or to other places in general?
That's a great question. I think just like the bare nature of people. It's like when I bring people to Alaska, I feel like we have like more bonding than anywhere else for some reason. And it's like you can take them hiking and you can see how uncomfortable people are just in nature because they're just so not used to it. And I think like here it seems like normal to some people, but it's like, you live in like a high-rise building, you're on like, I don't know, like the 40th floor. That to me is so unnatural. Like I love just being able to walk out in nature and So I guess maybe it would be like the connection to nature. It's like this is like our roots. And I think it's kind of important to know that. But it's also like sometimes you just see like the most beautiful landscapes and you're just like, this is so different. Like I woke up this morning, it was like the most beautiful sunrise in New York. And I was like, this is beautiful, but in a completely different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's something someone should do, like an action someone should take if they're in New York City or Los Angeles or Austin, Texas, and they want to be more in touch with nature, but they feel like they're in the system? Like what's an action someone could take to be more Alaskan or be more in touch?
That's a good question too, because I feel like I didn't really start going outside and getting out into nature until the pandemic, actually.
Wow.
Because I think I was just scared to go outside. Like there's a lot of comfort in your house and your home. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also really weird that, you know, like sometimes you're just in your house and you feel like you can't even go outside.
And we're more nature, we're more outside than we are really inside. We've just created this structure.
Yeah. So for me, I guess just like, I think walks are really important and that gets you outside. It's like, even if you're in the city, I think just literally breathing fresh air, being outside is super important. So just start with walks. And then I think you become more comfortable. Like I'm still getting more comfortable being outside. And like, I think a big thing is like, don't be afraid to get dirty. Like I'm like a, you know, kind of perfectionist. Like, like I wear my inside clothes inside, you know, I have a separation, but then when you're outside, you can't be that picky. And I think that is important. Like it's important to get uncomfortable and don't overthink it, I guess. Just don't overthink being outside and getting dirty.
Yeah, I love that. Talk to me about your writing and why you feel you have a blockage with writing in general. And, you know, you want to write a book someday, you've said before, but you're in this place right now of like feeling you can't, or what from your perspective, what's going on with you in writing?
So I think that writing for me is like the thing that I'm like every life experience that I have, I think would make a more interesting story. I personally, like I journal almost every single day. And I think I've always kind of like journaled in ways, but I took this college course called like creativity workshop. And that was the first time that like creativity was kind of presented as like a way to enhance your life, but also to make yourself look yourself better and to just know yourself better. And so there was kind of like a before and after when I started like having a regular journaling practice. Like you can observe it. It forces you to like observe yourself, your thoughts, and even your life. Like if I can look back, it's really painful to look back sometimes, but I can look back and it's kind of like you're giving yourself advice from lessons you've learned over and over again. And if you find yourself like writing about the same issue, the same problem, or like the same thing over and over, there's just like an awareness that you have. There's something that is really solidified when you write something down versus when you're just like thinking of something. I think it's like scientifically proven. But for me, writing has like changed just like awareness. And I think awareness is wisdom. Like you can't get to wisdom if you don't have the awareness. So I think that journaling like is life-changing. And then in terms of the book that I want to write, I don't know. I feel like writing is the place because right now on the internet, it's like perception trumps reality. I feel somewhat, I can't like share all of my innermost like deep thoughts and feelings or experiences. And so where do I go to like do that? I can either like talk to a friend or I can, you know, like write in my journal. And so I don't know. I think that I've had so many like unique experiences, but also I think it's very telling of the time that we're growing up in. Like, I think it's interesting that, you know, YouTube is like, social media is like a thing right now. I think it's interesting that like I'm half like Korean, half white. Like, I think it's before that, like literally, you know, not too long ago that wasn't legal. So I think we're kind of at like a pivotal point in like society where like my podcast is called Unemployed Millennial. But I just really like that idea. I think I'm writing a lot for the times. Like, I think that I recently went to this event called Summit, and I saw Paul Stamets like do a Q&A or just a talk, and he mentioned this thing called like two-eyed seeing, and he was talking about like an indigenous person. I should really like research this before I start talking about it, but he said that, you know, like this, it was like a half like Western, like half indigenous person, and the value that he brought was like he could see things through two eyes, and sometimes his indigenous like culture would fit better for a situation, and sometimes the Western side would make more sense. And so Paul's like conclusion was like, I think like this could benefit everyone. So I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but
well, it's funny because in your video with Sneako,
yeah,
you mentioned to him like you could be anything. So like, how does that impact your reality? Is like, with some people you could be like white, and some people you could be black, and some people. So like, you come from a similar background of like, people might look at you and feel like they could see you no matter who they are in you.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is, I think anyone, from my experience, everyone can come up to me and feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I think just because of the times right now, like if you're like a fully white person, you might not be accessible to like a black person, an Asian person, because they just like, or they stereotype you or they categorize you. And so that is also kind of why I think that I'm just in a unique position of like, I can connect with a lot of people, talk to a lot of people, be approached by so many people, where I'm just like, maybe it won't be an interesting book, but I think it's just like fascinating of like our current time that we're living in right now.
What can we do about that? Like somebody who's, let's say, fully white or fully Asian or fully black, like how can we make a more connected world?
Talking to more people. Yeah, like, and also just not, you had someone on your podcast recently that mentioned like Daryl Davis.
Daryl Davis, yeah, absolutely. What a legend.
Yeah, like that is the thing about connecting points, is it brings understanding and it brings conversations. Because I think a lot of the divide comes from like, we don't understand this group. Like this group doesn't understand that group. So I think, well, like, I think having more like two-eyed seeing would be beneficial. But in order to get to that place, it's conversation and like connection. It's like literally just having conversations and interactions with like people who don't look like you, or who didn't grow up like you, or who didn't grow up in the same place as you. And like being open to, maybe not even just being open, but like seeking those experiences out, or like seeking those friendships out. Because it's easy to just kind of settle in your own bubbles. And like, I think there could be bubbles for everything. I think there could be like a YouTube bubble, like a social media bubble, like a whatever school bubble. Like I like to get in as many bubbles as I can, because then I think you have a better understanding of reality.
Yeah. Well, just to close the loop for people, Daryl Davis is a black musician who's converted over 200 members of the KKK into non-racists. Just like a crazy thought or idea. And a lot
through
of
conversation.
Through conversation. Thank you. Through emailing back and forth with people, and through talking to people who people wouldn't previously like say like, you shouldn't have a conversation with this person. This is, people say to him to this day, like, how could you talk to somebody who's a racist? But I think your answer is, and my answer is like, through talking to people, we can understand them better. Yeah. And I think, you know, your skill, you've said about yourself, and I 100% agree after listening to a bunch of podcasts, is you're an incredible listener. Thank you. But like, what do you suggest to people who aren't as good of a listener, don't have, because being a good listener, I feel like, is having compassion for the other person, compassion for yourself, really trying to understand who that person is in that moment and reacting to that in real time. How do we become better listeners?
This is kind of a joke, but also kind of true. There's like a saying that's like, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Like you should just listen more, like stop speaking as much. Like I think a lot of the time in conversation, even in podcast, like you're like, oh, like I have this idea based on this thought. That thought seems like super important now, but if you like, you know, if you just listen more, it is super important. It'll come up later, but it's like actively, and it's maybe in like our, you know, lack of attention economy, whatever, because of social media, it's hard to just like be able to just listen, but it's actively being like, okay, even if you have to hone yourself in and be like, okay, what am I doing? I'm listening to this person right now. I think that literally helps. I think speaking less and just trying to listen more, because people also, like, I'm introverted. I would identify as an introvert. And sometimes I have opinions, and if someone asked me my opinion, I would share it. But that's the thing, is like, they just might not ask. and yeah.
And then it doesn't get out.
Yeah. So like, I'm comfortable keeping it to myself. Like, I'll tell it to my journal, whatever. But I think, yeah, just asking more questions and then just listening, I think, is the first step.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. When you've spent 10 years documenting yourself and making yourself the full focus of videos and then posting them out into the world.
Yes.
How does that impact your reality in terms of, does your perception of yourself change because you are now the star of a show that you've created about yourself?
I like that question because I really try to not let that happen.
Yeah. How do you not let that happen?
I think I'm actively trying to solve this problem. I think two things is, I think you literally need to take breaks on YouTube, at least. Because I've been saying this, but being a full-time YouTuber does not usually develop a well-rounded person or even member of society.
In what way?
Because you get like the inflated ego, or you're just doing things to feed the algorithm, to feed the beast. Like, you're looking a lot externally instead of internally. Yeah. So I think you need to like have that Alaska time, like that alone time by yourself in nature, whatever. And then I think the second thing is community. And that's something that I never really had until Your Mom's House. Like, I didn't understand that. And I think that those two things like kind of will solve social media, because right now everyone who is a YouTuber, like, I went to this thing called Creator Camp, and we had this speaker named Paul Koji, or that's not his last name. He works at Koji. We just called him Paul Koji, man. And he gave us like all these, like a presentation on YouTube burnout. And he's like, the shelf life of a YouTuber is 5 years. And it's because like people feel like they have to keep feeding this like algorithm, keep posting every single week, or else it's all gonna disappear. And I think the only solution to that, and I think that's a bigger statement maybe on the platforms, like the algorithm, whatever, it's like requiring that of you. But I think the way to beat that is to build this online community so that when you're taking your break, if you're just like, I cannot make videos right now, I don't have the bandwidth, like I don't have the mental capacity, then you can still be in other people's videos. And then you can kind of take a step back. And it's really just like a rising tide lifts all ships. I always say that wrong.
That was your favorite quote.
It is my favorite quote, and I should learn it.
No, you got it.
Yeah.
And I think that it's also important to recognize that you are on the path with other people, and that allows you to just realize like, oh, it's really about the people you meet along the journey, more so it is than just about me being the focus of everything.
I think that also really helps the like, oh, you know, the perception of yourself if you're just like the only person in your videos.
Yeah.
I think there's always some type of like weird thing that happens, like an amazing thing that happens when you introduce, like if you have a conversation, it's like two heads are always better than one. And I think there's some weird dynamic on the internet where it's like the more people you start, like I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I'm calling it like the multiverse. Cause like I eventually, like, cause right now I have like my YouTube, this is kind of going off on a tangent, but like, you know, I have like 10 years of videos, but it's like, unless you sit down and watch all those videos, you're not going to get like a holistic story of like where I am, what I'm doing. So like I eventually want to put that on a blog platform and just be like, but then I'm super interested in this idea of like, I want to compile like all of the collaborations that I'm doing. So it's just like, you know, this person knows this person, I've connected this person, and you can just get like a whole like multiverse. It's just like real life, but then you can document it too.
Why not a book as opposed to a blog?
I think a book, that's my main, like I always say like when I'm like 30 or 40, I always say 40, but then people are like, why not just like write it sooner?
It's interesting how we do that, right?
Yeah.
We put time frames and ages on specific tasks. We often do this like married. We have to be married at 30.
Yeah.
Or like we have to do this at this time. And I think like it's we kind of inherited this structure from school of like, all right, I have to graduate at 18. All right, I have to I have to take this test at the end of the semester. But like what I've realized about life is it's flowed in such a way, almost like a river, that I could never have expected to be sitting in this chair in this moment 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm sure likewise, you couldn't have imagined living with different creators that you didn't even know yet, perhaps 3 years before you did. Right. So it's like, especially when you're on the path of media in general, it's like it takes you on a winding road that you can't really predict and you can't really put time frames to.
You're convincing me to write my book sooner, man.
Good.
Yeah, that is interesting. It's very true. That's kind of the thing I think that I've learned the most is like you can't control anything. So like back to the power of now, it's like just truly living like this moment and taking things like right now is like kind of the most important thing that you can do.
100%. Well, you know, like I was talking earlier to the incredible producer Wolf, and we were talking about how particular content allows you to connect with a person. If two people both like, if someone likes the power of now, I know that I'm probably going to like that person. If someone likes Tim Ferriss or Naval Ravikant, we're going to be friends.
Yeah.
So like, what attracted you to people like Tim Ferriss and Naval Ravikant?
Okay, I love this idea too. This is something I've been thinking a lot because I've been meeting so many people and then I can kind of tell their thoughts. Yeah, exactly what you're saying, like by the people that they listen to. Or for me, I was attracted to Tim Ferriss because he was having these conversations that I would have loved to have with people around me that just like didn't want to have those conversations.
Yeah.
So that's why like when we first met, I was like, you're a Twitter guy because I just looked at all your podcast guests and I was like, these are literally all people that I've been following on Twitter for so long because I love their ideas and like what they're doing. And I think the internet allows you to find those people who you can actually connect and have those ideas with more. But when I first started listening to podcasts, like literally no one around me was having those conversations. And that is kind of the beauty of even creating content. It's like, again, a lot of the times I don't know what thoughts that people would like to hear because they're just like thoughts that I have all the time. But if you just put it out there, like even the perception trumps reality thing, I don't even know if I put that. I guess I put that in my Sneako video. I said it like one time, like 5 people were like, I loved this idea. And I was just like, that's so cool that they could take that away and then we can have this conversation just based on like this little clip in this one video that I was just like, I don't think anyone would think this is as fascinating as I do.
Well, that's the interesting thing about media and content in general, that of the present day, you could take one moment or one clip from a podcast and that could be an entire focus of conversation for somebody. And you can get to know what the audience appreciates while also being like, do I appreciate this idea? Right? Like if you said that and you didn't like that idea, then it wouldn't be talked about again. Like you'd say, well, I had this idea and people resonated with it, but I think this now. And so what I find fascinating is like you put out a podcast, you put out a video, and then the audience will almost tell you where to go next. And that is a really cool concept that if you had done a book back in the day, you never really could have like figured out, all right, what chapter do people resonate? It would take a much longer time.
Yeah.
The instant feedback of it is pretty remarkable.
That's so true. Yeah, I just had this girl named Sophia come up to me because of a video that I did with Nathaniel Drew. And we talk about like privilege. And she had this very specific take. I don't even remember like what she took away from that. But I was like, that is so fascinating and so cool that literally just being on someone else's video, I can have this entire, like we hung out at this event, like we spent like it was like a 4-day event. We spent like 2 days together because she was just like able to see like this idea. And she actually had made like a Instagram response and I like remember seeing it. And then she just like came up to me in person. Like that is the beauty of the internet. Like, especially if you're like a things person, like, or an ideas person. Then it's just like endless ideas to talk about. That's a really good point. I like that.
Yeah. What was the idea that she brought up to you, if you remember?
I'm trying to remember. We're literally having a conversation because it was a very specific takeaway from this conversation, but I don't remember what exactly it was.
Yeah. And that's the thing too. You've said tens of thousands, probably millions of words on the internet.
Yeah.
Like throughout.
Yeah.
And in that moment, that was your thought. And it was captured through video or through audio or through a written word. And people resonate with some of those thoughts.
Yeah.
But to you, they were just thoughts and and they didn't get stuck to you.
Yeah.
And there's something beautiful about like something that you said at one point in your life can help somebody else in the future that you don't even remember. Which I think that's such a beautiful concept.
That's the thing that I'm thinking. Like, like you're your thoughts because you're with them all the time. But then it's like, yeah, if you put it out there, then someone can resonate with it and then take something away. That's something I'm thinking about like a lot recently.
Do you think that more people should create content, or do you think that this has been a net negative or net negative or net positive for putting out content for 10 years?
I think people should 1,000% create more content. I think most people only ever consume, which the reason why I think people should create is like even just to understand what goes on behind the perception trumps reality thing. Like every single clip on a YouTube video not every single clip, but it's like you can edit it in a very specific way. You can manufacture like a takeaway that you want just by editing, even if you have someone else say it for you. Yeah. Like, I think just knowing the behind the scenes can help people's understanding of what happens, or even just like what they're seeing online. Yeah. I think if you never create anything, you just actually are there's like an ignorance that you just don't quite understand. So I think everyone who's consuming content should also create content.
Well, it's funny because my friend Zach Pogrob at Behavior Hack on Instagram talks about how people are living more online than they are offline. And by creating, you are getting to know and understand how the things that you are consuming are how they're created and how
even affecting you like psychologically.
Yeah, exactly. And when you do that, you become a more complete person because your identity is more online than it is offline, perhaps, if you're spending more than 8 waking hours on a phone or device of some sort.
I think you also become more of a free thinker.
Yeah.
Like you're constantly, if you're just consuming, you're constantly being fed whatever the algorithm is feeding you or whatever is on your feed. And I don't know, there's no like behind the scenes to that. You're just like literally consuming everything. So I think it's very important, even if you don't even show it to anyone. I think just like the act of actually creating, like seeing what happens behind doing that is kind of like very crucial in this day and age if you want to have an understanding of like how even you're maybe being fed things or like your thoughts, why you're thinking the way you are.
How your brain works.
Yeah.
To some extent.
Because we're only getting more digital. Like it's not going to change.
Yeah.
So I think everyone should.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you have the 3 C's of content creation, which is helpful for people who might be like, okay, like Annemarie says I should create content, but like, how do I even do that? The 3 C's is helpful for somebody where you could either curate, you can create something brand new, or you can capture something. How'd that idea come to be? And could you break that down for people?
Wow, I love that you brought this up because I've been talking a lot to other creators about this too. So I have this, I think maybe like coming from my blockages on like creating and posting content, I'm very, very interested in other people's creative process, especially like on YouTube. And so I think I just naturally like am very curious about how other people create things or post things online. So I did like an apprenticeship with this YouTuber named Shelby Church. And from working with her, I was just like, wow, we have such completely different processes for how we're making our videos that I'm like, there's like a million ways to do this. And I was just like fascinated by that. So
what were some of the main differences?
Okay, so she does very creating. Okay, so the 3 C's, capture, create, curate. Capturing is like a vlog. Like if I'm literally, or I guess this podcast is capturing this conversation. So we don't have any plan. You have like an outline maybe, but we're just kind of like following the river. Yep. We're just like, where is this going to go? And we're just capturing everything that's happening right now.
Yep.
Creating is maybe you have an outline for a video that you want to make, or we'll go with videos since I know videos better. Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, Shelby does a lot of these where she's like, let me try to think of an example. Okay, well, an example of a video I'm working on that's much more creating is like how to create your own reality. So in this video, I'm like, okay, I've been observing like things that I think people who create their own reality, like you're building this podcast, you're hanging out with the people that you want to hang out with, you're talking to the people that you want to talk to because you've done that for yourself. So creating that looks like, okay, I have this list of ideas that I want to talk about. And then I'm literally like going back to old footage or like podcasts. That's like the cool thing about podcasting now is like I can kind of use other people's like thoughts and ideas. And I'm like putting that all like on a predetermined kind of, like I have the idea in my head already, and I'm just trying to take it from my brain onto a timeline so that I can make a video. But it's like, it's very representative of this idea that I have that I'm just like, I'm trying to portray that and create that right now. Mm-hmm. And then curating is kind of a similar thing. I think it's just like mixing kind of the medias. So like my video that I'm creating is also like curating a lot of my own content. So it's like taking like this Elliot Biz Now podcast, like maybe I'll take something from our podcast when we record it. And it's like all just a curation of like thoughts and ideas in one place. And this can be for like music, like it could be for anything. You can curate like, I think curating is most reflective of your taste. So like your taste in like music or like taste in thoughts, like even the people you follow, you're curating your following list. That's why I love Twitter, because I'm like, I'm not following anyone I know in person. I'm following people whose thoughts I like. Yeah. So you're curating this experience. So that's kind of the breakdown. What was it?
When you look at, I was just curious about that process. When you look at those three, are there examples of people who do specific parts of those process the best from your perspective? I'll tell you, like, someone who curates incredibly well from my perspective is David Perel. He has all these ideas. He's incredible on Twitter. And I know if I want to be smarter, he's curating the best ideas and people and things. And I could just go to his timeline and check it out.
I actually made like a video based off of a conversation he had with Matthew Kovac.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I agree.
That was a great episode.
Yeah.
I'll put that in the show notes below so people could check that out.
So I agree with that. Like I've been following David for like years. Like so I agree. I think a good person who I think curates a ton of ideas, I always open his newsletter, is James Clear.
Yes.
The habits guy.
Writer,
Atomic
author.
Habits. Yeah.
Author of Atomic Habits.
His newsletters are so relevant. Like his last one, I don't even like, I don't know if you're subscribed, but I can share it with you later. It's so good.
Yeah.
So I love how he curates things. I recently subscribed to your Substack.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see. what I've seen so far is really good, but I'm excited to see like what you're putting together. That's probably my top person. And then I think it's really interesting because before, when I would consume podcasts like Tim Ferriss, you don't really think about that much about, oh, he's curating this whole guest list. Yes. And it's very particular, very specific, because that's something, as I'm trying to build like a community of like creators, and then it's like, oh, you get backlash for having Sneako on. And then you have to kind of think, you can't just be like, okay, I'm just going to have my friends on. But in a way, you kind of have to think more carefully about it. I think I'm at a point where I'm just like trying everything. I'm still open to everything. And maybe the curation will come later once you like refine your taste or like know more of what you're trying to do. But I think that's a great curator. Yeah,
well, exploring is helpful in the beginning stages of any journey. And then exploiting is when you have a particular way of being that you like. And I think we all do this throughout life. Like we first explore, we're like, all right, I want to do this. I want to try this. I want to be this type of person. I want to go into this field. And then you're like, all right, I actually just like this. And I'm going to get better at this. I'm going to double down on that.
Yeah. Is that something that you've like come up with, or is that a thing? Explore and exploit? I've
heard that from David Perel.
Okay.
And that triggered me from that perspective, like thinking about that. And I realized, like, from doing this podcast, it's like, okay, what am I doing here? Like, why do I enjoy this so much? And I'm really just exploiting communication in that sense, and really trying to like get as good as I possibly can at taking the ideas in my head and bring them out into the world.
Yeah.
What are you exploiting right now?
That's a good question. When you said that, I don't know, exploiting, it's tripping me up as a word.
Yeah, no, because it is
the connotation,
typically a negative connotation.
Yeah. But that is very interesting. I like that idea. I think when I was at your mom's house, I was exploring. So I was just kind of putting everything out there, posting things people just wanted to see what we were doing. So like it didn't even really matter. Like you could just post a vlog and then it'll get a lot of views, which is a very unique position to be in. But I think now I'm exploiting the kind of like the balance or the ideas more. It's like I have this way of living that I think maybe, and even, you know, post-COVID, like tools that I've learned to deal with like stress or anxiety. And it's like if we're entering or we are in a recession, like there's going to be more stress in the world. And so right now that's kind of what I think I'm good at, is like kind of just being mindful of, or just like tackling anxiety and like stress and pressure, or like those negative feelings and kind of like transmuting them to like something else. So that's kind of what I'm exploiting.
I love it. Yeah. You certainly do a great job at that from my perspective.
Thank you.
Take me through your podcast. You just started a podcast, Unemployed Millennial, established 2022.
Yep.
Why? Why did you start a podcast? Why has it always been a dream or an ambition for you to podcast one day?
Yeah. It really just, I think I started my YouTube 10 years ago. And in my YouTube, I'm not a very visual person actually. Like I like to read, and I like to listen. And so a lot of the time, my biggest challenge and the feedback that I get from like better YouTubers, they're like, you just need to like speed things up. Like people want fast moving things. But for me, I'm just like, oh, but I recorded like 40 minutes of me talking about these things that I like to talk about. And so I honestly just think it's probably a more fitting podcast for me. But I also have been thinking a lot about the idea of just like connecting points, because I do think that there is like a lot of separation and so much like polarization. And I'm just like, if I am, like, I think Naval has this like thought. It's like, find the people who need you the most, the job that needs you the most, like whatever, the project, like work on those things. And it's like, if I'm a connecting point for other people, then maybe, and I like to listen and have conversations, then maybe a podcast would be better suited. And I also, you know, really, I felt seen, even though I don't know, I hate that phrase, but by like listening to Tim Ferriss and how he talked about things and like even his like trauma and upbringing and like what he's kind of done. Yeah. I think he's, you know, like I felt like he was like healing or helping me like guide a pathway to how I want to live my life. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do. And also I just think it's like I meet so many interesting people and I don't want to like take their time or like do something, but if I can build a platform where people find it worth it to like come and have a conversation with me, then I think that's really cool. It's basically just a way that I can reach out to the most interesting people I know and like sit down and talk to them, which I feel like is exactly what you're doing. Like I really admire your podcast.
Thank you. What would a win for your podcast look like a year from now?
That's a good question. I think like literally just have like being able to have this list of people who I think are interesting, like even you would be on that list of people, and just being able to like sit down and talk to them. And I think I will definitely struggle. Like I'll ask you this in my podcast. Like it's so cringy for me to like listen to the podcast over. I'm just like, it's painful.
What are you cringing about?
Just like the questions that I ask, or like if there's like an awkward pause, or like my last episode, I'm just like, I don't even want to like sit and listen to it because I'm just like, this is like painful for me. So I'm sure that I will go through that, but I think that's also a win, is me getting over that.
Yeah. Well, it's helpful to really like sit with the things that make you cringe. And that's obviously the hardest part of life, is sitting with the things that are uncomfortable to you.
Yeah.
But if you can get past that, there's some freedom that exists on the other end. Similar to you posting a video gets, you know, some negativity and maybe that makes you feel uncomfortable and sitting with that negativity.
Yeah.
Or like now you posted something and you get feedback that you don't expect and you can grow from that. And I always tell people, put out the things that you cringe for, show people the things you're uncomfortable to show them, because there's growth in that. I like to end these podcasts with challenges, because we listen, we do an hour of talking, people an hour of consuming, and we appreciate your time. I appreciate your time so much. For anyone listening, what should people do? What's a challenge we can leave people with to live the best version of their own life?
Okay, I think consistent with some of the things we've talked about here, I would challenge people to create in some way. Whether that's even just like journaling, like writing, capturing, I guess, your own thoughts, or just like literally creating whatever platform you most consume. Try creating something and seeing like what the behind the scenes process of that looks like. Or even just posting something. Like I think a lot of people just have that barrier, or they put that restriction on themselves and they maybe do actually want to post. Just do it. And then we can both sit with our cringe for a little while.
I love it. Annemarie, it's such a joy to talk to you, and it's such an easy conversation with you, and easy interview. And I'm so grateful for you for spending the time with me, sharing your wisdom, sharing your ideas. Where can we send people to connect with you further?
Ooh, you should send them to the podcast that I'm going to record with you. Unemployed Millennial, episode number 7, I think.
Wow, 7. I love
7.
that.
Hopefully it's 7.
Yeah.
I think it is.
Or your YouTube channel as well. Linked below.
You can check it. Yeah. Annemarie Chase.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Danny.